What if the stronger side had won? Not the side we think of as stronger today because we know how the story ended. I mean the side that actually had more soldiers, more ships, and more gold at the time. In the year 334, before the Common Era, a young man from a small kingdom in the north of Greece crossed the sea. His name was Alexander. He had about 35,000 soldiers with him. He was heading straight for the heart of the Persian Empire. To everyone living at that time, this looked like a suicide mission. The Persian Empire was the largest and most powerful force the world had ever seen. It stretched from the borders of India all the way to the Nile River in Egypt. It covered millions of square miles. It had been the superpower of the world for over 200 years. When we think of empires, today, we often just think of lines on a map. But the Persian Empire was more like a massive system that kept the known world running. They had built incredible roads that stretched for thousands of miles. They had a postal system that could carry a message across a continent in just a few days. They had a single currency that merchants used from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indus Valley. The king of Persia was called the King of Kings. His name was Darius III. He sat on a throne of gold in a city called Persepolis. His wealth was so great that it was almost impossible to measure. He could call upon hundreds of thousands of soldiers from every corner of his land. He had archers from the plains and cavalry from the mountains. He had ships from the coast and war chariots with blades on the wheels. Alexander, by comparison, had almost nothing. His kingdom was small and had spent years fighting with its neighbors. His army was professional and very well trained, but they were far from home. They were deep in enemy territory with no way to get more supplies if things went wrong. Alexander himself was only 21 years old. He was ambitious and he was a brilliant leader, but he was also a gambler. He was betting his entire life and the entire future of Greece on a single throw of the dice. Most people at the time expected the Persians to crush him in the first month. The local governors in the Persian Empire did not even think they needed the great king's help to deal with him. They figured their own local armies could handle this Greek invader. They planned to meet him at a river, push him back into the sea, and that would be the end of the story. If that had happened, the world we live in would be completely unrecognizable. Our language, our science, and even our ideas about government are built on what Alexander did next. But in that first year, his success was not guaranteed. It was barely even a possibility. Alexander stood on the shore of Asia and threw a spear into the sand. He claimed the land as his own. It was a bold gesture, but it was also a very dangerous one. The King of Kings was finally starting to pay attention, and when the Persian Empire decided to destroy someone, they usually succeeded. We often look back and see Alexander as an unstoppable force. We see his victory as inevitable because it is what we read in history books. But it was not inevitable. He came inches away from death in his very first battle. One spear thrust or one sword swing could have ended his life before he ever saw a major Persian city. If Alexander had died there, or if he had simply been forced to retreat, the Greek dream of expansion would have died with him. The Persian Empire would have remained the undisputed master of the world. The center of gravity for human civilization would have stayed in the East. It would have stayed in cities like Babylon and Susa. It might never have moved to Europe at all. To understand how the world changes, we have to look at the moment where everything shifted. The moment where the Persian Empire had the chance to end the Greek threat forever. That moment happened at a place called Issus. The year was 333 before the Common Era. The place was a narrow strip of land called Issus. To your left was the Mediterranean Sea. To your right were towering, jagged mountains. Between them was a small plain divided by a river. This was the perfect place for a trap. Alexander and his 35,000 men were moving south. The great king, Darius, had managed to march his massive army behind them. Suddenly, Alexander was cut off from his supply lines. The Greeks were trapped between the mountains and the sea, with a much larger army at their backs. Darius had over 100,000 soldiers. He had his elite guard, known as the Immortals. He had thousands of Greek mercenaries who were fighting for Persian gold. He even had his own family with him in a massive, rolling camp behind the lines. Darius was so confident of victory that he had brought his mother, his wife, and his children to watch the destruction of the Greek boy. Alexander knew he could not win a long battle. He did not have enough men to hold a line against 100,000 Persians for very long. He had to do something drastic. He had to end the war in a single minute. He gathered his best horsemen, the companion cavalry. These were the sons of the Macedonian nobility. They were the best trained shock troops in the world. Alexander put himself at the very front of the wedge. His plan was simple and incredibly dangerous. He was going to charge directly at the center of the Persian army. He was going to ride straight for Darius himself. The Greeks charged through the river. The water turned red as the Persian archers let fly thousands of arrows. But Alexander kept moving. He crashed into the Persian line like a physical weight. He was looking for the great king's chariot. He was looking for the golden umbrella that marked the position of the King of Kings. In our history, this is the moment Darius panicked. As Alexander got closer, Darius saw the spears of the Macedonians getting nearer and nearer. He turned his chariot around and fled the field. When the Persian army saw their king running away, they lost heart. The greatest empire in the world crumbled because one man got scared. But what if he didn't? Imagine the moment the two kings were only 50 yards apart. In our world, Alexander threw a spear that missed Darius but killed his chariot driver. In this world, Alexander's horse, Bucephalus, takes a wrong step in the muddy riverbank. The horse stumbles. The momentum of the charge breaks for just a second. That second is all the Persian guard needs. Instead of Alexander throwing his spear, a Persian javelin finds its mark first. It hits Alexander in the chest. The young king falls from his horse into the mud of the Panaris River. The Greek line sees their leader go down. The invincible Alexander is lying in the dirt. The shout goes up among the Persians, "The boy is dead!" The companion cavalry stops. They try to turn back to save their king, but they are surrounded. The Persian immortals move forward. They are not running away this time. They are closing the trap. Darius does not flee. He stands tall in his chariot and points his golden sword toward the sea. He orders his cavalry to sweep around the Greeks and push them into the water. The narrow geography that Alexander hoped would protect his flanks now becomes a graveyard. There is nowhere for the Greeks to run. To the left is the deep water. To the right are the mountains they cannot climb, in heavy armor. In front of them is a wall of 100,000 Persians who are now hungry for revenge. By sunset, the river is no longer flowing with water. It is choked with the bodies of the Macedonian army. The dream of a Greek empire dies in the mud of Issus. Alexander the Great never becomes the great. He becomes a footnote in Persian history. A rebellious prince who tried to challenge the King of Kings and paid the price. Darius stands over the battlefield. He has won the most important victory in the history of his empire. He has not just defeated an army, he has decapitated the only force that could challenge Persian rule. But the death of Alexander is only the beginning. With the Greek army gone, there is nothing left to stop Persia from moving west. The great king looks toward the horizon, toward the cities of Greece that sent this boy to his land. He decides it is time to finish what his ancestors started 100 years ago. He decides to burn Athens to the ground. The news of the disaster at Issus travels faster than any army. It spreads along the royal road. It moves across the Aegean Sea on the fastest merchant ships. In the capital city of Macedonia, they were waiting for a victory message. Instead, they get a nightmare. Their king is dead or captured. Their entire army, the fathers, sons, and brothers of the nation, has been wiped out. For the Greek cities that followed Alexander, the fear is even worse. Athens and Sparta had only joined Alexander because they were forced to. Now, the man who forced them is gone. But the enemy he made is very much alive. The Persian Empire does not just forget an invasion. They do not just go back to their palaces and celebrate. Darius III has a long memory. He remembers that the Greeks burned a Persian city decades ago. He remembers that they just tried to steal his entire empire. The first thing Darius does is secure the coast. He sends his fleet to every major port in the Mediterranean. He does not need to fight many battles to do this. The cities of Asia Minor see the Persian ships on the horizon, and they open their gates. They had welcomed Alexander as a liberator just months before. Now, they are begging for mercy. They take down the Greek flags and put up the Persian colors. They hand over the Greek soldiers who were left behind to guard the walls. In Egypt, the situation is even more grim. The Egyptians were planning a massive revolt against Persia. They were waiting for Alexander to arrive so they could crown him as a pharaoh. But Alexander is not coming. The Persian governors in Egypt move quickly. They arrest the leaders of the rebellion before it even starts. They make it clear that no one is coming to save them. Egypt remains a province of the great king. The gold of the Nile continues to flow to Persia, not to Greece. Back in Macedonia, the kingdom begins to tear itself apart. Alexander had no children. He had no clear heir. His generals begin to fight over what is left of the treasury. They argue over who should lead the defense of the homeland, but they have no soldiers left to lead. The elite of the Macedonian army died in the mud of the river. While the Greeks are fighting each other, the Persian fleet is growing. Darius hires thousands of new sailors from the cities of Phoenicia. He builds hundreds of new warships. He is preparing a hammer to strike the Greek mainland. This time, the Persians are not coming to negotiate. They are coming to finish the job. They are coming to turn Greece into a collection of Persian provinces. The great philosophers in Athens hear the news and realize their time is running out. The men who are debating democracy and logic now have to decide how to survive a conquest. The pride of Greece is gone. In its place is a cold, hard realization. The West had its chance to challenge the East. The West lost, and the King of Kings is finally coming for his revenge. The King of Kings does not just want a victory. He wants an end to the Greek problem once and for all. He sends a message to every city in Greece. The message is short. He asks for a handful of earth and a jar of water. It meant you admitted the great king owned your land and your life. In the past, the Greeks would have laughed at this. The city is full of widows and orphans. The 30,000 men who followed Alexander never came home. The docks are quiet. The great silver mines that paid for the Athenian navy are running dry. In the marketplace, men still gather to talk, but the spirit of the city is broken. They look at the horizon and wait for the Persian sails. A man named Phocion takes the lead in the city. He is an old general who always thought Alexander's war was a mistake. He tells the people that a live slave is better than a dead hero. He tells them that the Persian king is not a monster. He says the king just wants order. The Assembly of Athens meets one last time to vote. For years, this assembly was the heart of the first democracy. Citizens stood up and debated the future of their world. But today, there is no debate. There is only fear. They vote to send the earth and the water. They vote to end their own independence. A Persian governor moves into the city shortly after. He does not burn the Parthenon. He does not destroy the statues of the gods. Instead, he installs a local leader who is loyal to Persia. He calls this leader a tyrant, which back then just meant a ruler with absolute power. The democracy is over. The courts where citizens decided the law are closed. From now on, the law comes from a palace thousands of miles away in Susa. The same thing happens in Sparta. The city of warriors, famous for never surrendering, is silent. Without their allies and without a navy, they are surrounded. The Persian governor in Sparta demands that the young men of the city join the Persian army. The legendary Spartan soldiers are turned into guards for the great king's borders in the east. By the time 2 years have passed, the map of Europe has changed. The Mediterranean Sea has become a Persian lake. Every ship that sails from the coast of Spain to the mouth of the Nile pays a tax to the great king. The gold of the world is being pulled toward the center of the empire. But there is a bigger change happening, something you can't see on a map. The Persian Royal Road, which used to end at the coast of Asia, is extended. It now runs all the way through Greece and into the Balkans. This creates a massive, safe highway that stretches across the known world. In our history, the trade between the East and the West was always interrupted by wars. But in this world, there are no more wars. There is only the peace of the King of Kings. The Great Silk Road becomes the most profitable trade route in human history. Persia becomes so rich that the concept of poverty almost disappears in the major cities. But this safety comes with a very high price. The restless, questioning spirit of the Greeks begins to fade. In Athens, the philosophers who used to ask why are told to be quiet. The scientists who were starting to study the stars and the human body are told to focus on things that help the empire. When everyone is wealthy and safe under one ruler, you don't need to challenge the way things are. You just follow the rules. The center of human civilization is now firmly locked in the East. Europe is just a quiet, unimportant province on the edge of a massive Persian world. And as the years go by, people start to forget that there was ever any other way to live. The idea that people could rule themselves is dying out. The great king looks at his map and sees no enemies left. But he doesn't realize that by ending the struggle, he has also ended the spark that leads to new ideas. The world is stable, but it is standing still. And in the distance, a new power is starting to grow in a small Italian town called Rome. In our world, Rome learned everything from the Greeks. But in this world, there are no independent Greeks left to teach them. Greece was no longer the center of its own world. The transition to Persian rule did not happen with a single explosion or a massive fire. It happened slowly, like a tide coming in and covering the rocks until they disappear. The Persian Empire was not interested in destroying the Greek cities. They were interested in making them part of a giant working machine. Darius III knew that dead men could not pay taxes. He knew that a city in ashes was of no use to the great king. So he offered the Greeks a deal that most of them felt they could not refuse. He promised them peace. He promised them that the endless wars between Athens and Sparta would finally stop. He promised that the trade routes would be safe from pirates. But in return, the Greeks had to give up their most precious possession. They had to give up their right to decide their own future. Every city was given a new leader chosen by the Persian governor. These leaders were often local Greeks who had stayed loyal to the King of Kings. They were called tyrants, and their job was simple. They collected the money, they kept the streets quiet, they made sure that no one spoke about rebellion. In Athens, the Great Assembly, where thousands of men used to argue about the law, became a social club. They could still talk about the weather or the price of olive oil, but they were no longer allowed to talk about war or peace or freedom. The heart of democracy was not cut out. It was simply allowed to stop beating. This changed the way people thought. For hundreds of years, the Greeks believed that a man's highest duty was to his city. Now, their highest duty was to a king they would never see in a palace thousands of miles away. The great philosophers of the time had to find new things to do. In our world, men like Aristotle spent their lives thinking about the best way to run a state. In this world, those men were hired as accountants and clerks for the Persian government. They were given comfortable lives and big houses, but they were no longer allowed to ask dangerous questions about power. The Persian Empire loved experts, but it hated troublemakers. The scientists and doctors of Greece were sent to the great universities in Babylon. They worked on irrigation projects in the desert. They worked on medicine for the Persian army. Their brilliance was used to make the empire stronger, not to make the world new. The Greek army, once the most feared force in the world, was broken up into small pieces. The soldiers were not sent home. They were given new uniforms and sent to guard the borders of the empire in the Far East. The famous Spartan warriors were now standing on the edges of the Indian jungle. They were protecting Persian gold mines from local tribes. They were no longer Spartans. They were just employees of the King of Kings. Even the religion of the Greeks began to change. The Persian Empire was very tolerant of other gods. They didn't tell the Greeks they couldn't worship Zeus or Athena, but they did insist that the great king was the representative of the divine on earth. They built statues of the King of Kings next to the statues of the Greek gods. Over time, people started to think of them as one and the same. The distinct, sharp edge of Greek culture was being smoothed away. It was being mixed into a giant, colorful, Persian-flavored soup. The poets stopped writing plays about heroes who defied kings. They started writing songs about the wisdom and the mercy of the throne. The spirit of competition that defined Greece was being replaced by a spirit of obedience. The world was becoming safer. The world was becoming richer. But the world was also becoming much more predictable. The fire of the West was being kept in a small, controlled fireplace. And as the years go by, fewer and fewer people remembered what it felt like to stand in the heat of a wild flame. The Persian Empire had succeeded where every Greek general had failed. They had finally unified the Greeks. But they had done it by turning them into servants. With the Greeks under control, the great king could now focus on the one thing that mattered most. He could focus on the money. He was about to turn the entire world into a single, massive marketplace. Imagine you are a merchant living in this world. In our history, traveling from Greece to India was a death sentence. You would have to cross through dozens of different kingdoms. Each kingdom had its own laws and its own taxes. And each one probably had a small army that wanted to steal your goods. But in a world where Alexander lost, those borders don't exist anymore. The great king has turned the entire world into one giant shopping mall. It starts with the money. The Persians used a gold coin called the derek. In our world, every city-state had its own currency. A silver coin from Athens might be worth nothing in a city in the east. But now, the derek is the only coin that matters. You can use the same piece of gold to buy silk in China and sell it for olive oil in Greece. This creates a level of wealth the world had never seen before. The Great Silk Road is no longer a collection of dusty, dangerous paths. It is now a government highway. The Persians built stations every few miles along the route. These stations have fresh horses and armed guards. They have places to sleep and water for the camels. It is the safest road in human history. A merchant can carry a fortune in spices across 5,000 miles and never have to draw a sword. The Persians were also master engineers who didn't stop at roads. In our history, the Suez Canal was built in the 1800s. But the Persians had already started digging a canal between the Nile River and the Red Sea. Without the wars of Alexander to stop them, they finished the project. Ships can now sail from the Mediterranean Sea all the way to the Indian Ocean. The world is suddenly much smaller. Goods that used to take a year to travel now arrive in a few weeks. Look at where all this money is going. In our history, the wealth of the world eventually flowed toward Rome and Europe. In this world, it flows to Babylon. Babylon becomes the most important city on the planet. It is the center of the world's bank. It is where the prices of every good are decided. The city grows until it is 10 times the size of any city in Greece. It is filled with hanging gardens, massive libraries, and markets that never close. The Persian Empire is no longer just a military power. It is a trade empire. They don't need to conquer people with spears anymore. They conquer them with gold. Every small tribe on the edge of the empire wants to be part of this system. They want the Persian coins and the Persian roads. They want the Persian peace. This creates a world that is incredibly stable. There are no massive wars for hundreds of years. There is no Great Depression because the empire is too big to fail. But this stability has a side effect. Competition is usually what drives people to invent new things. When you are already rich and the system works perfectly, you don't look for a better way. Technology begins to slow down. Why invent a better boat when the current ones are making you more money than you can spend? Why look for a new way to farm when the king's canals provide all the water you need? The world is drowning in gold, but it is starting to get bored. And while the Persians are counting their coins in Babylon, they aren't looking west. They think the wildlands of Italy are just empty forests. They think the people there are just barbarians who will never matter. They are so focused on the wealth of the East that they don't see the storm coming. Because in the mountains of Italy, a city called Rome is starting to build an army. And the Romans aren't interested in Persian gold. They are interested in something else. But before we look at Rome, we have to look at what we lost. We have to look at the ideas that never got the chance to grow. Because while the Persians were building canals, they were also burying the future of science. We often think of history as a series of wars and kings. But the biggest thing Alexander did wasn't just winning battles. He moved ideas from one side of the world to the other. In our history, he built dozens of cities and named most of them after himself. The most famous one was Alexandria in Egypt. In our world, Alexandria became the brain of the planet. It had the Great Library. It was a place where Greek scientists met Egyptian doctors and Babylonian astronomers. They shared their secrets. They combined Greek logic with Eastern math. This mix of cultures is what created the foundation of the modern world. But in a world where Alexander lost, Alexandria is never built. The spot where that great city should be is just a quiet strip of sand and swamp. There is no great library. There is no central place where all the world's knowledge is gathered in one room. Instead, knowledge stays trapped in small pockets. The Greeks keep their philosophy in Athens. The Egyptians keep their medicine in Memphis. The Persians keep their astronomy in Babylon. These groups don't talk to each other. They don't share their books. They don't challenge each other's ideas. This means that progress slows down to a crawl. In our history, a Greek scientist in Egypt figured out that the Earth was round. He even calculated how big it was with incredible accuracy. He could do that because he had access to Greek tools and Egyptian records. In this new world, that man never gets the chance. He stays in a small town in Greece and spends his life teaching basic grammar. The scientific revolution that we think happened in the Renaissance was actually built on these ancient Greek ideas. If those ideas never spread, that revolution might never happen at all. But it wasn't just science that was lost. It was art and religion too. In our history, Greek soldiers traveled all the way to India. They stayed there and built kingdoms. They brought their statues and their styles of building with them. Because of this, the first statues of the Buddha actually looked like Greek gods. They had the same robes and the same facial features. It was a beautiful mix of East and West. In this world where Persia wins, that never happens. Greek art stays on its own side of the sea. Indian art stays in the mountains. The world is much less colorful. It is much more divided. People in the West grow up knowing nothing about the East. People in the East think of the West as a place of barbarians who have nothing to offer. The global village we live in today is based on the idea that different cultures can talk to each other. Alexander was the one who started that conversation. Without him, the world is a collection of silent rooms. The walls between those rooms are high and thick, and for the next 1,000 years, no one is strong enough to knock them down. This cultural silence changes the very way we think. We lose the idea that there is a universal human experience. We only care about our own tribe and our own king. The world becomes a much smaller, darker place. And while the East is comfortable in its golden cage, something is happening in the West. The city of Rome is looking for a way to expand. Usually, they would have conquered the Greeks and learned everything from them. But now, the Greeks are just subjects of the great king. Rome is about to walk into a world where they have no teachers. 100 years have passed since Alexander died in the mud of that riverbank. The world has settled into a deep, heavy peace. If you walked the streets of Babylon in this year, you would see the richest city in the history of the human race. The Persians have built walls covered in blue tiles and gold leaf. The markets are filled with silk from the east and spices from the south. The King of Kings is no longer just a ruler. He is seen as a god on earth. He rules over millions of people who have never known a day of war in their entire lives. But this peace has a hard boundary. Far to the west, across the sea, a new power has finished uniting the land of Italy. The city is called Rome. In our history, Rome is the empire that changed everything. They conquered the Greeks, and then they conquered the known world. But in this world, the Greeks are not theirs to take. The Greeks are the most valuable servants of the Persian Empire. When the first Roman ships sail toward the coast of Greece, they are not met by small, independent cities. They are met by the Persian Navy. These are massive ships built with the best wood and rowed by thousands of professional sailors. They are funded by the endless gold of the great king. This is the moment where two completely different versions of humanity finally collide. The Romans are a young, hungry people. They have spent centuries fighting in the hills and the mountains. They are masters of the sword and the shield. The Persians are an old, stable empire. They are masters of the checkbook and the supply line. In our history, Rome won because the East was divided into small, fighting kingdoms. Alexander's generals had spent years tearing his empire into pieces after he died. Rome just had to pick up those pieces one by one. But in this world, there are no pieces. The Persian Empire is a single, solid block of power. When Rome wins a battle, the Persian king does not panic. He does not even leave his palace in the east. He simply sends a message to his governors. He tells them to send more men from the borders of India. He tells them to hire 10,000 more fighters from the desert. He has enough gold to keep fighting for 1,000 years without getting tired. The Romans eventually realize they are not fighting a country. They are fighting a machine that cannot be broken. After years of bloody war, the two giants reach a stalemate. They draw a line right down the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. The West becomes a Roman world. The East stays a Persian world. This creates a planet divided in two. Rome becomes a land of soldiers and strict laws. But because they never conquered the Greeks, they never learned the Greek way of thinking. There are no Roman poems based on Greek legends. There are no Roman statues that try to capture the beauty of the human body. The Romans remain a practical, stone-cold people. They build great bridges. They build strong sewers. They build massive prisons. But they do not build a civilization of the mind. They do not wonder about the stars or the nature of truth. In the East, the Persian world remains a place of gold and tradition. They have all the knowledge of the ancient world locked away in their palaces. But they have no reason to use it to change anything. They are content to let the sun set over their quiet gardens every night. The world is now two halves of a broken whole. One half has the strength to fight, but no new ideas. The other half has the ideas, but no spark to make them grow. The conversation between the East and the West that Alexander tried to start has been silenced, and as the centuries crawl by, the two sides begin to forget that the other one even exists. They become two separate planets sharing the same soil. The progress of the human race slows down to a crawl. It is a dark age of the spirit that lasts for 1,000 years. And the cost of that silence is something we are still paying for in the future. The word West would not mean what it means to you today. In our history, we think of the West as a place of science and voting and individual rights, but we only think that because the Romans stole those ideas from the Greeks. And the Greeks only had those ideas because they were allowed to keep asking questions. In the world where Alexander lost, that bridge was burned. The shadow of this one moment lasts for more than 2,000 years. Think about the biggest changes in human history. Think about the way we learned to use machines. Think about the way we learned how the human heart works. Most of those breakthroughs started with someone looking at an old Greek book. They started with someone finding a scrap of paper from Athens and asking a simple question. In this world, those scraps of paper are gone. They were lost in the libraries of Persian governors who did not care about Greek math. They were buried in Roman wars where no one understood the value of Greek philosophy. This means the progress of the human race does not just slow down. It stops. It stops for 1,000 years. We would be living in a world that looks like the Middle Ages, but it never ends. There would be no reason to build a telescope. There would be no reason to sail across the ocean to find new lands. The Persian Empire is already large enough. The Roman Empire is already strong enough. They both have everything they need. The hunger for the new is a very specific idea. It comes from the Greek belief that a single person can change the world. But in a world of two giant empires, the individual does not matter. Only the system matters. Only the King of Kings or the Emperor matters. This creates a planet made of only peasants and soldiers. The small class of thinkers and inventors never appears. The printing press is never invented because the kings do not want people sharing ideas. The steam engine is never built because there are plenty of slaves to do the work. The map of the world stays exactly the same for century after century. Europe remains a quiet place of small farms and cold castles. The East remains a golden palace that never looks forward. The two sides grow so different that they eventually stop seeing each other as human. They become like two different species living on the same rock. One side believes in absolute order and tradition. The other side believes in absolute law and military strength. Neither side believes in freedom. Neither side believes in the future. They only believe in the past. This is the long shadow of the spear that missed its mark. Alexander was the only person who could have tied these two worlds together. He was the only person who wanted to create something new out of the old. Without him, the world is just two old men sitting in the dark, refusing to speak to each other. And that silence lasts until the modern day. In this world, you are not listening to this on a phone. You are not watching this on a screen. You are probably working in a field, just like your father did. And your son will do exactly the same thing. Because in a world without Alexander, the future never happened. So, what does this story tell us about the world we actually live in? It shows us that history is not a straight line that always leads to progress. It is more like a web of thin threads. If you cut just one of those threads, at the right moment, the whole thing falls apart. The first lesson is about the power of a single person. We like to think that big historical changes are caused by massive social forces or economics. But sometimes it really does come down to one 21-year-old man on a horse. If Alexander had been just a little less lucky, the next 2,000 years of human life would have been completely different. The second lesson is that peace and stability can have a very high price. The Persian Empire offered the world safety and wealth. They ended the wars and they built the roads. But they also ended the friction that forces people to think in new ways. Without the struggle between different ideas, the human mind tends to settle into a long sleep. The third lesson is that culture is fragile. We think of things like democracy or science as if they were natural laws that were bound to be discovered. But they weren't. They were specific ideas created by a specific group of people in a specific place. If those people are conquered and silenced before their work is done, those ideas can vanish forever. The fourth lesson is that the world we know is a lucky accident. We live in a world where the East and the West have been talking and fighting and learning from each other for centuries. That conversation started because a small army from Greece managed to do the impossible. They broke open the gates of the most powerful empire on Earth and let the light in. When you look at a map today, or when you use a piece of technology, remember the mud. At the riverbank of Issus. Remember how close we came to a world where none of this ever happened. We are the children of Alexander's victory. We live in the world he built with his spear, and it is a much louder, messier, and more exciting world than the one we would have had without him. This is a hypothetical scenario based on the historical record. Real outcomes would depend on factors no model can predict.